People act like Cape Verde reaching the World Cup would have been some unbelievable fairy tale, as if nobody could have predicted it, even though they had practically secured qualification back in 2014, before FIFA shut everything down at the last moment. They were right on the doorstep when one decision wiped out years of progress. But instead of falling apart, they rebuilt from scratch and spent the next 12 years chasing redemption, assembling a super team from players the rest of the world had overlooked. Think Vozinha's story sounds unbelievable? Think getting called up to a World Cup through LinkedIn is ridiculous? They even had a player who worked as a mailman, and that's only scratching the surface. Now here's where it really begins. In 2008, Cape Verde had no head coach and no money to hire one, with World Cup qualifying only a month away. So they made the only move they could. They promoted the team's fitness coach to lead the squad, under one condition: he could choose his own assistant, because behind the scenes, the federation already had someone else in mind. Bubista, the man who manages them today. Even back then, they believed he was the one capable of transforming the team. The truth is, Cape Verde had never been handed an easy path. After the Portuguese discovered the uninhabited islands, they turned them into the heart of the Atlantic slave trade. When slavery finally ended, the islands were left behind as a forgotten colony, and independence didn't suddenly solve everything. There was a reason nobody had lived there before. The land was dry, unforgiving, and barely able to sustain crops. Droughts and famine became part of everyday life, so anyone who had the chance eventually left. Football was hardly a priority. Although they raised their own flag the day independence arrived, it still took another 11 years just to join FIFA, then another 8 before they could even play their first African Cup of Nations qualifier. By then, Bubista was already at the center of it all. In fact, he captained the national team. Despite all the struggles, he spent 16 straight years holding the squad together. As he once admitted, "We didn't even have proper kits to wear." And by the early 2000s, even though Cape Verde had entered World Cup qualifying for the first time, they were sitting 182nd in the FIFA rankings, with virtually no chance of competing. When his playing career ended, walking away was never an option. He quickly joined the coaching staff, and once he became assistant to the fitness coach turned manager, everything started to change. Their strategy couldn't have been clearer. Remember how so many Cape Verdeans had left the islands? Well, there were actually more Cape Verdeans living abroad than at home. Players like Nani, Nuno Mendes, Patrick Vieira, Henrik Larsson, even Cristiano Ronaldo, through his great-grandmother, were all eligible to represent Cape Verde. The challenge was persuading them, and with a national stadium that had artificial turf and only 8,000 seats, convincing anyone wasn't exactly simple, but all they needed was momentum. By 2010, after earning a draw with Portugal with 5 starters who had grown up there, they finally had proof the idea could work. Then, fortune smiled on them in an unexpected way. The first homegrown Cape Verdean wonder kid emerged, Ryan Mendes. Signed by Le Havre at just 18 alongside talents like Pogba and Mendy, he developed so rapidly that when legendary scout Steve Walsh first traveled to watch Riyad Mahrez, Ryan was actually the original target. Only a few years later, Lille signed him as Eden Hazard's replacement, right as Cape Verde reached their first ever AFCON playoff against Samuel Eto'o's Cameroon. But the timing somehow became even more remarkable. On the day of the playoff, Cape Verde's first-choice goalkeeper was injured, forcing an inexperienced backup to make his debut in the biggest match the country had ever played. That goalkeeper was Vozinha, and somehow they pulled it off. Even more impressively, in their first AFCON appearance, they reached the quarterfinals, but the momentum didn't last. Not long before the tournament, Ryan Mendez suffered a serious ankle injury that almost ruled him out completely. He barely recovered in time to play, and perhaps he never should have, because that quarterfinal became his final match for the next 7 months. After a year, surgery, and endless setbacks, things became so difficult that he had to publicly deny rumors he would retire at only 24. Meanwhile, with Cape Verde forced to continue their World Cup qualifying campaign without him, disaster struck. Cape Verde defeated Tunisia on the final match day to book a place in the playoffs. It was the greatest achievement in the nation's football history until FIFA stepped in. 3 months earlier, Equatorial Guinea had been ordered to forfeit a victory against Cape Verde because one of their players had previously represented Spain without officially changing his international allegiance, since, after all, he wasn't even eligible to play. But here's the twist. In that match, Fernando Varela had already been shown a red card and handed a 4-match suspension, so Cape Verde argued that because the game had been ruled void, his suspension should have been wiped out too. Convinced they were in the clear, they started him in the decisive fixture, only for FIFA to void that match as well, sending Tunisia into the playoffs instead, meaning Cape Verde suddenly found themselves ranked 27th in the world, yet still absent from the World Cup. And by the next year, they'd climbed all the way to become Africa's highest-ranked national team, defeating Portugal 2-0 and going unbeaten in the AFCON group stage despite playing one match in the middle of a tropical storm. Even so, a place in the knockout rounds still slipped away, and after Boubista stepped aside to gain proper club-level experience, missing out on the following World Cup after a crushing 4-0 qualifying defeat to Burkina Faso caused everything to unravel. Before long, their scouting operation shifted into full throttle, regardless of whether Boubista was involved. They uncovered Jamiro Monteiro, a Netherlands-born midfielder playing in the Dutch second division under a young coach named Arne Slot. They also discovered Nuno da Costa, a former Sporting Academy player stuck in France's 5th tier at 24, and signed him just before his career exploded, eventually earning a Premier League move less than 4 years later. Yet, if one signing truly showed how far they were willing to go, it was Pico Lopes. You've probably heard this story. While searching late into the night for anyone with even the smallest trace of Cape Verdean heritage, manager Rui Aguas came across the Shamrock Rovers defender's LinkedIn profile and messaged him with an invitation to represent the national team. The catch was that Pico, born and raised in Dublin, couldn't speak a single word of Portuguese, so when he finally saw the message, he dismissed it as spam, and if Rui Aguas hadn't kept pushing, Pico would have never represented Cape Verde, because it took him another 9 months before he copied the message into Google Translate and realized it was genuine. Unfortunately, even after adding him to the squad, Cape Verde still couldn't qualify for the AFCON, so there was only one path left. Boubista had to return and fully take charge of the national team, and the very first rule he introduced was simple. Creole became the only language players were allowed to speak. Whether they already knew it or not, everyone had to learn. It was the easiest way to make sure nobody forgot what they were representing. And judging by the results, it clearly paid off. Despite the pandemic creating countless obstacles, they not only stunned the Brazilian Olympic team, but also secured an immediate return to the AFCON, reaching the knockout stage even after half the squad suffered food poisoning at 2 different hotels. Still, reality arrived quickly. Just months later, with Cape Verde only 1 victory away from reaching the World Cup playoffs for the first time in 8 years, defender Steven Fortes gifted Nigeria a goal inside the opening minute. After that, all their effort was only enough to earn a draw. But looking back, there probably wouldn't have been much heartbreak if they'd known that match marked the beginning of a golden era. Ahead of the next AFCON, Boubista assembled what was arguably the strongest wave of newcomers the country had ever produced. To begin with, he finally persuaded Jovane Cabral to commit after years of turning down Cape Verde in hopes of receiving a Portugal call-up, despite being described by Ruben Amorim as Sporting's most important player during their first league title in 14 years. Then came Gilson Benchamal, a striker who had drawn interest from AC Milan and Juventus as a youngster, but surprisingly chose a move to Russia instead. He would later become the first Cape Verde player to score a hat-trick on his first international start. Above all, though, Bubista convinced both Steven Moreira and Logan Costa to switch allegiance, two former French youth internationals, with Moreira emerging as an MLS Defender of the Year contender and Logan Costa preparing for an €18 million transfer to Villarreal. In other words, they now had the only player in their squad competing in one of Europe's top 5 leagues and the most expensive Cape Verdean footballer in history. Even then, he still wasn't my favorite addition that year. That honor belonged to Deroy Duarte, because what made his story remarkable was that he didn't start playing football until later in life. Because his brother Leros had earned a place in Sparta Rotterdam's academy. Yet, even though he ultimately emerged as the more gifted of the two, their bond remained so strong that today he's the one constantly driving his brother to push even harder. Ever since receiving his first call-up for those qualifiers, he kept repeating, "I cannot imagine a world where I'd play in a tournament without my brother beside me." And man, Deroy didn't just become a key player almost instantly. As Cape Verde booked their place at AFCON, in the final moments, Leros received his very first call-up too, despite never having played a single game for them. By then, with 25 players born across 6 different countries and representing 25 clubs in 16 separate leagues, Cape Verde had finally become the complete version of themselves, and it was time to send a message about what they were truly capable of. Placed in a group with Ghana, Egypt, and Mozambique, they stunned everyone by finishing first without losing a game, before eliminating Mauritania in the round of 16. Still, after equaling their best ever AFCON run by reaching the quarterfinals, they somehow couldn't find the net against South Africa, despite firing 25 shots. And when the match went to penalties, even with South Africa missing 1 kick and Vozinha saving another, their goalkeeper, Ronwin Williams, denied not 2, not 3, but 4 penalties. And the disappointment hit so hard that after veteran Stopira had already retired, Vozinha chose to walk away as well. But both of those decisions would prove to be mistakes. Without them, everything unraveled for Cape Verde. They didn't just fail to escape the AFCON qualifiers, they ended bottom of their group with only a single win from 6 matches. And when things reached that point, drastic action became unavoidable. To begin with, several players convinced 40-year-old Vozinha to come out of retirement. Then came a couple of fresh reinforcements. Sidney Cabral, a Dutch-born player who had climbed from Germany's 5th tier to earning a move under Mourinho in just 3 years, alongside Telmo Arcanjo, who was fresh off winning the Portuguese League Cup with Vitória de Guimarães after returning from a 14-month injury layoff. And before long, 6 matches into World Cup qualifying, Cape Verde sat at the top of their group. There was just one problem. Although the World Cup had expanded to 48 teams, only first place guaranteed automatic qualification and the chance to prove to FIFA they didn't need the playoffs. But standing in their way was second-placed Cameroon, the only side to beat them. And then Logan Costa, the most valuable player in Cape Verde's history, tore his ACL again. Once more, desperate times demanded desperate measures. After convincing Vozinha to return, they also brought 38-year-old Stopira back, not to directly replace Logan, because that responsibility fell to Dini Borges, but because, as Vozinha always said, our strength comes from the way we treat each other like family. And what is a family if not one generation helping the next grow? So, around the hour mark that day, 24-year-old Dalen Livamento Ironically, Logan Costa's cousin picked up the ball in midfield, surged past everyone, and scored what might have been the biggest goal in Cape Verde's history. Then, in almost poetic fashion, after a wrongly disallowed goal in the following match delayed qualification until the final match day, it was Stopira who found the net and secured their place. Cape Verde had qualified, not because the World Cup had expanded, but because they had truly earned it by proving they were the best. Amid all the celebrations, one supporter told reporters, "This is the biggest thing that ever happened in Cape Verde." But little did he know what was about to come. Even though much of the football world still doubted them, wondering how they could possibly survive a World Cup when Portugal and Iran were the only non-African nations they had ever faced, well, you already know how that turned out. With Vozinha producing the best football of his career and their backline setting a World Cup record for the fewest fouls ever committed in a match, they began by holding Spain to a draw before repeating the feat against Uruguay, this time while playing fearless attacking football.